Hello and welcome to my very first YouTube tutorial series. This series is going to cover Photoshop and will be split into 3 short videos that cover the process I went through to create this graphic inspired by Netflix's The Last Dance. The series is aimed at absolute beginners, so whether you've used Photoshop before or just getting into it for the first time, hopefully you can follow along. I'm going to cover everything from document setup to 2 or 3 of the main tools I feel are very important in creating easy but effective looking graphics. So if you're able to get the grip of these, then you'd be well on your way to doing so. So the first thing that we want to do is go and open Photoshop. Now if you don't have a copy of Photoshop, there is a free trial on Adobe's website for 7 days. So now's a good time to go and get that. I'll pop the link in the description. So when you're opening up Photoshop for the first time, you're presented with something similar to this. What we're interested in is create new over on the left hand side here. Now Photoshop is pre-populated with a load of presets for the likes of print. If you were to select A4, it pre-populates these fields on the right hand side which dictate what your document is going to look like. The one we're interested in today is mobile, and we're going to do something that's like an Instagram story or phone wallpaper. So if you view all presets, you can either pick which device specifically you would like to make it for. I quite like selecting this iPhone 8 template, as I think the X is slightly elongated, a little bit too tall, and there's better proportions in this one. So as you can see, it's pre-populated everything on this right hand side here. We don't really need to play with any of these. The only one that we want to make sure that we've checked is this artboards one. So I think by default it is unchecked, but we want to make sure we're in portrait mode and we want to check artboards, and I'll tell you why later on. So this is our artboard here. The first point of reference pretty much in Photoshop is your layers panel down the bottom right hand side. So if you don't see your layers panel, then you want to go up to window and make sure you've got layers activated, and hopefully it should show up with this here. Now at the moment we don't have anything on our artboard, we've just got the first layer 1, which is transparent. But what we want to do is go ahead and drop in the image that we want to cut out first of all. So the image of the subject that we're looking to cut out. So if I go here, this is just an image that I have saved from Google. And all we want to do is drag and drop into here, and it should appear like this. And it should either take place of the original layer, or it might create a new layer on its own, but we'll drop it in and it should appear like this. So when it comes in this form, you want to hold Alt on the Mac or Control on the PC, and we don't quite want to drag it to the final size that we want it yet. We want it just shy of the edges, and that'll be important when we're cutting it out, so we don't really want to overlap any of the edges at the moment. So you can resize it as you drop it in there just now, and to place that properly we just want to hit that little selection tool up in the top left there. So as you can see, we have one layer on our artboard, and what we want to do is get into the habit of naming our layers. So if you double click on the name of the layer there, you have the ability to rename it. So it's important to get into the habit of doing that, because whilst in this project we might only have sort of 10 layers and they're fairly easy to navigate, as you get more and more experienced and do more complicated projects, you could end up adding 50 to 100 layers in, and it does become quite difficult to remember which is which. So at the moment we've got our one layer in there named Dennis Rodman. About the layers panel, and another point of navigation is this little eye icon to the left of the image there. If we click that, it hides that layer. So at the moment it's showing, we can hide that layer. We can also lock that layer. So if we were happy with the position it was in and we didn't want to make any further changes to it, we can click lock, and then anytime you try to select that, it won't select it. And this can be particularly handy when you've got multiple layers and you've got different things sitting on top of each other, under each other, and it keeps selecting the wrong thing. You can just hit lock and make sure that it won't pick that up. We'll unlock that for just now. Now what I want to do to basically show you how the layers panel works in Photoshop is we're going to create our background next. So I want to create a new layer, which is done by clicking this little plus icon in the bottom right. We'll create a new layer and we're going to rename it BG. Now once we've done that, we make sure that we have our background layer selected, so we've clicked on that. And we want to go up to our tools panel and find the eyedropper tool. Now as you can see from this little video here, this little demonstration, that allows you to pick any color on this image. So if you pick that, if you pick a point here, you'll see in this little point over on the left hand side that that is the reference color that you've picked there. So what we want to do is we want to pick one of the nice red colors from the middle of his number there. And once that is selected in this square, that means that is the main color you have selected. If you swap them, you can have two colors selected at a time. If you swap them around, then we now have the black selected, but we want to keep with the red. And now we want to find our paint bucket tool. Now this should be visible on the left. If it's not, find one that looks like this, maybe the gradient tool, and you want to right click on it. If you right click on any of these, it shows 2 or 3 other tools that are related to that one. So we want to find our paint bucket tool. If any of the tools aren't showing up in there by default, if you click on the ellipses there, right click on the ellipses, you have the option to edit your toolbar, or there's a bunch of tools there that aren't actually shown by default. So we want to be picking on our bucket tool. And with our background layer selected, we're going to fill that with the red colour that we just selected. So I think we're quite happy with that for the time being. So what we'll do is we'll save our document. That's also good practice to get into. And I'm just going to name it tutorial 1. So we've filled our background there. Now what we want to do is maybe we'll hide our layer for the moment, our photo layer, and we'll create a new layer and we'll drop it just underneath the top one. Now it's quite important to also note that within the layers panel, the layers that you have stacked at the top show on the top. So at the moment the background is showing at the bottom. Now if we were to go and switch this colour here, is we'll fill this layer black and we'll select the eraser tool. And we'll turn off our layer here. Yeah, so we've got that full layer filled black, and we want to get our eraser tool, and we'll just hit a nice big chunk out of the middle there and a chunk out of the top to give us a little bit of a gradient at the bottom. Now what you can see with the layers here is if I move that gradient up above Dennis Rodman, then you now see that start to show there. So the layer that's at the top is the one that's sitting on top. I know in a lot of applications you might do a right click, arrange, send to back. That's not how Photoshop works. Photoshop works in stacked layers. So at the moment we have our background there, we have a dark gradient at the bottom, and we're going to tidy that bit up at the top that I missed, and we've got, we'll call this dark gradient bottom, and want to get another new layer, and we're going to call this white gradient top. And with this one we are going to select our brush tool, and we're going to double click on the foreground colour here, and we'll go up and pick white. Now we want a nice big brush again, And if we go up to the top here, we've got opacity. I think we'll set that to 20%. So that controls how much you actually apply when you hit the stroke of the brush. So we're just going to have a wee light one. We'll have something like that. So we've got lighter at the top, darker at the bottom, and we've got a red in the middle. And we've got those 3 layers named up the right hand side. So I think we're pretty happy with where the 3 of those sit at the moment. So we'll go and lock those. Now, if we turn our Dennis Rodman layer back on, what we want to do is cut this out. So we've got it sitting just inside the boundaries of our artboard, and we want to go and find this tool, which is called the Object Selection tool. Now, I think by default that is within the extra tools and not out in the current tool set, so you might have to go in here to look for that one. If you go to click that and you're getting this little circle with a line through it, it's because we don't have a layer selected. So we want to make sure we've clicked on our Dennis Rodman layer, and now it should give you the option to do so. So you want to select basically all of them. You want to make sure you're selecting all of him and you're not cutting out a bit like that. So you want to select all of them. And once we've done that, this shows up with this sort of dotted line around them. And that means that is your selection. That's what you've got selected at the moment. The tool's pretty good in terms of detecting what you might want to be cutting out. So that just automatically assumes you'll be cutting out a person. It picks up the rough edges. But as we can see, it hasn't really selected his shorts down here. There are a couple little bits in here where, you know, it's just kind of picked up any random mottled bits of the background. So to fix that, we want to go into our, once we've got that selected there, and we've still got our object selection tool selected, we want to go into this button up the top, right in the middle, select and mask. Now yours might not show up like this by default. It might show up slightly different, it might not show up with this transparent background at all, but before we do anything, we want to have a look at the properties on the right hand side. So with this opacity slider, if I drop that down to 0, then it doesn't really show you anything. And if I put all the way up to 100, it shows you too much, because you can see very clearly what is selected, but to start refining that edge, you need to be able to see, I think, sort of both. So I always have it set at 50%, and then you can kind of see the bits that are selected, but also see the full picture in the background, which is really helpful. Edge detection, I never really change this from 0. If you do, the tool's probably not good enough to detect edges that well, and if you start playing about with the radius, you get sort of little mottled bits that come across the skin, across the arms, across all the edges, so I always leave that at 0. Smoothing, 9 or 10 is quite a good setting for that. Feather just softens the edge of the selection a little bit. If you go much more than sort of 1, you start to find that the subject just looks really blurry at the edges and it doesn't look realistic. So I always go for 0.4, which kind of is enough to sort of iron out any of your little mistakes that you might have made on the way around, but not too much that it doesn't look realistic. Contrast, I go for around 32, and shift edge I have at -12. So shifting the edge basically takes what you've selected and then takes a little percentage of that off, so that if you have missed any little bits on the outside, or have any sort of dark lines or any of the background still in the photo, then that'll just trim those off a little bit. Decontaminate colours, we don't want to do that. I'll just show you what that does though. If you hit that, that tidies up some of the colour. If you just look at the hairline around here, it's supposed to stop any of the background images like that black getting in, but it actually doesn't do a very good job of it, because it just kind of comes up with this sort of thick looking line, and that shows up in your final cut. So we don't really want to do that. So yeah, with these settings, that's pretty much okay. The other important bit is to make sure when we've got output 2 that we've selected new layer with layer mask, because that will give us the most flexibility once we've finalised this cutout. So we don't hit OK, because we're going to make our own little changes to this selection first. So we have tools up in the corner here, and this refine edge brush tool, so I'll tell you about this one first. This one kind of just smooths off little edges, so it can be quite good for bits like ears or little bits where, let's see if we can find a bit that would be applicable to, possibly here on the arm where it's quite a bumpy line and it should be fairly smooth, so we'll go for a small brush, and if you run along there it just smooths that out and makes sure that basically it refines the edge that you've had picked up. The best one is this brush tool. So if I want to add to the selection, I'll just click and drag and that bit's added to my selection. If I want to remove from the selection, such as this little bit up here, we want to hit Alt or Control, and then we can just click to remove that little area. So usually you want quite a small brush to do this with, as the edges can be quite fiddly. So I'm holding Control or Alt here and just removing those little edges up that side, and you'll be able to tell whether you're adding or subtracting by the little plus or minus that flick between when you hit the Alt button. So you can zoom in quite far, and this part of the process can take a little bit of time, but it is really, really worth doing, and you can kind of tidy up all the edges in your selection here. So once I've used that tool, the brush tool there, it is sometimes worth going over it with the refine edge as well, and you can just see that it takes away the little edges that I'd left there behind with the brush tool. The other tool that's quite useful is the polygonal lasso tool. So this again is another manual tool, but say if I've got this circular brush selected, it's difficult for me to get into, you know, the little nooks there to try and remove them. So what we want to do is select this tool, and we'll hold Alt again, and this basically gives you a point where each time you click it is creating a selection for you. So you want to work your way up the line that you want to select, and you just draw your way up here till we get to around this point. Don't want to be too square, so you've got to click quite often. And I'll just go down to this bit down here. So just trace that point of his arm, and once you get back into the bit that's been selected, you can just connect that back up. So when you get close to this end, a circle should appear, and that will automatically select the bit that you have just cut out. So I'm going to do that for these little difficult bits here. And then what I want you to do is go around and make sure that your edges are all tidied up using the tools that are available on the left. So, oh, that's the wrong way. So I want to add to the selection down here, because I know from looking at this that the shorts have not been selected properly. It doesn't really matter if you can see, like I'm doing here, I'm going over the edge at the bottom there. That doesn't particularly matter. So as long as you've got what you've selected, what you want selected on the main photo. So I'm going to speed up the rest of this bit if you go around and tidy up the rest of your edges, and I'll show you what I've got at the end before I click OK. When we get up to the hair, the Refine Edge tool will do a pretty good job of kind of removing some of that background. So you want to just run the Refine Edge tool all the way around the hairline here at the top. It will leave a sort of dark line in places. It's worth trying to chop as much of that out as we can at the minute, but for these smaller bits we will leave them just now, and we'll sort that out when we come to editing the photo once we've cut it out. But usually the Refine Edge tool does a really good job of hair, depending on how clean the background is. So I think I'm fairly happy with that selection there. I've tidied up a few of the edges. We've got a really fine cut out around most of them. A little bit around the hair that we're going to tidy up later on. But once we get to that point, and we can just check it with our opacity here, yeah, I think that looks pretty good for just now. So we want to hit OK in the bottom corner, making sure that we've got new layer with layer mask as the output. And what you should be left with is this. So what it does is it hides the layer that we had before with the full image, and it creates a new layer with what's called a layer mask on it, which is this sort of black and white image there, which basically hides the background. So as you can see in this image on the left hand side, the background is still there, but what this mask does is just hide that proportion that we just selected. And that's quite important to know that that's the function of a layer mask. So I think that'll pretty much do us there just now. If you have any questions, please just do drop them in the comments and I'll try my best to answer them. What we'll go on to in the next video is talking about blend modes and image adjustments and how we can get sort of different effects onto the cutout that we have here and the background that we have. So hopefully you enjoyed that and it wasn't too long-winded and descriptive enough, but as I say, drop it in the comments if you need something else explained a little bit further and I'll try my best. Thanks.